Imagine a world where the threat of nuclear war looms over everyday life, where two superpowers constantly clash in a struggle for global influence, without ever officially declaring war. This was the Cold War, a 4-decade standoff that shaped modern history, technology, culture, and geopolitics. Today, we're exploring how the Cold War unfolded, from its origins to its enduring impact on our world. The seeds of the Cold War were planted as World War II ended. The Allies had defeated Nazi Germany. But now, a new rivalry emerged. The United States and the Soviet Union, once allies against fascism, were ideologically opposed, the US promoting capitalism and democracy, while the Soviet Union pushed communism. As Europe lay in ruins, the two powers sought to fill the vacuum, each determined to spread its own system and ideology. Tensions soared as Eastern Europe came under Soviet control, sparking fears in the West of a communist expansion. One of the most defining images of the Cold War was the Iron Curtain, a term coined by Winston Churchill. This metaphor described a stark divide in Europe, with communist states in the East and capitalist democracies in the West. In 1949, Germany was split into two: West Germany, backed by the West, and East Germany, under Soviet influence. Berlin, though within East Germany, was also divided, leading to one of the most iconic symbols of the Cold War, the Berlin Wall, which would later become a literal and figurative barrier between the superpowers. The arms race was a defining feature of the Cold War, with the US dropping the first atomic bombs on Japan in 1945. The Soviets hurried to develop their own nuclear weapons, succeeding in 1949. This sparked an arms race as both sides amassed massive nuclear arsenals. The concept of mutually assured destruction, or MAD, emerged. If either side launched a nuclear attack, the other could respond with equal force, ensuring mutual destruction. Despite the horrific potential, this delicate balance actually deterred direct conflict between the superpowers. Although the US and Soviet Union avoided direct war, they clashed indirectly through proxy wars around the world, in Korea, Vietnam, Afghanistan, and beyond. Each side backed opposing factions in civil wars and uprisings. These hotspots saw brutal fighting, often with high civilian casualties, as both superpowers tried to spread or contain communism. Vietnam became particularly infamous in the West, with American involvement sparking protests and reshaping US foreign policy for years to come. Through proxy wars, the Cold War left scars across Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Another arena of the Cold War was space. The Soviet Union launched the first artificial satellite, Sputnik, in 1957, shocking the world and fueling fears of Soviet technological superiority. The US responded, launching NASA and racing to catch up. When the Soviet cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin became the first human in space in 1961, the US vowed to surpass this achievement. The space race culminated in 1969 when Apollo 11 landed on the Moon, marking a symbolic victory for the US and showing how Cold War rivalries spurred incredible advancements in science and technology. In October 1962, the Cold War nearly turned hot. The Soviet Union secretly deployed nuclear missiles to Cuba, just 90 miles from the US mainland. When American spy planes spotted the missile sites, President John F. Kennedy confronted Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev. For 13 tense days, the world held its breath as the superpowers teetered on the edge of nuclear war. After intense negotiations, the crisis was defused. The Soviets agreed to remove their missiles from Cuba, while the US secretly promised to remove its missiles from Turkey. This close call led to a push for better communication, resulting in the famous hotline between Washington and Moscow. The 1970s brought a brief thawing Cold War tensions known as détente. Both sides signed treaties to limit nuclear weapons and agreed to reduce their stockpiles. However, tensions resurfaced with the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979, marking the start of a renewed, more cautious rivalry. The US boycotted the 1980 Moscow Olympics, and the Soviets responded by boycotting the 1984 Los Angeles Games. The Cold War seemed endless, but economic strains in the Soviet Union were beginning to take their toll, sowing the seeds for its collapse. In 1989, a series of revolutions swept across Eastern Europe, with communist governments falling one by one. In November of that year, the Berlin Wall, the iconic Cold War divide, was torn down by jubilant crowds, symbolizing the end of the Iron Curtain. By 1991, the Soviet Union dissolved, marking the end of the Cold War. The US emerged as the world's sole superpower, and Eastern Europe began to rebuild, embracing democracy and capitalism. The Cold War was over, but its legacy still shapes global politics. From NATO alliances to ongoing tensions with Russia, the Cold War reshaped the world in countless ways. It drove technological advancements, influenced foreign policy, and left a lasting impact on global relations. While the Soviet Union may have fallen, Cold War rivalries and their ripple effects remain visible today. From NATO and nuclear arms agreements to regional conflicts, the Cold War may be history, but its lessons echo on, reminding us of the fragility and resilience of peace. In an age of global power struggles,